Okay, hi, I'm Anna Spencer, and today we have a schmooze day, which means that I never tell people what we're going to talk about, and they don't know till we get here. And I've already been surprised by the fact that we've got an argument going before I had any idea we were going to. So now let me introduce my three guests for today. Leon Kosals, who wants to argue about NATO, and I can't stop him, and he will, so hang on. Kekeshan Basu, I should tell you that Leon Kosals is a professor of sociology and criminology here at the University of Toronto and mostly in Moscow at the Higher School of Economics in Russia. And therefore, normally he goes back and forth and spends half each year in each place, where his family lives in Toronto now. But with the COVID thing, he's been teaching all his courses online and staying in Toronto the whole time. All right, Kekeshan Basu. Hello, Kekeshan. How are you? Say hi.
Thank you. Hello.
Kekeshan is a student at the University of Toronto and is a big-time activist. She organized an outfit for young people, in fact, even children, and runs it. It's called Green Hope. And she has young people all over the world working together on various issues, mainly climate issues, but also war and peace issues, right? Good. Okay. And in Western Ontario, London, Ontario, at Western University, is Professor Erica Simpson, who is a professor of international relations and political science. And she's a specialist in NATO. So she's been surprised to come on and find that there's already an argument waging between me and Leon when I said she's the one he should argue with, right? So good morning, Erica. How are you?
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you, Meta. Nice to see you, Kekeshan, and nice to meet you, Leon.
What is this background of yours? Where is it?
Chosen, I probably somewhere in Eastern Europe. It looks like it. I don't know. I can change if you like, Meta. I just felt still Christmassy.
It's a very suitable. Maybe Leon recognizes this. Do you know where this is, Leon?
It's similar to Tallinn, maybe Estonia, maybe other place, because it looks very European and maybe Central European. That's right.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. What's on your mind these days, Kekeshan? What are the issues that you like to discuss with your own organization?
Well, yeah, thank you, Meta, for having me here. And just for a little bit of context, Green Hope Foundation works literally across all aspects of sustainable development, covering the three pillars of economy, society, environment. So really, as you mentioned, Meta, we do work on climate, but our work is equally as much in the nuclear disarmament sector, in the health sector, in the clean water and sanitation sector. So we really bring all of that together. So what's really at the front of my mind right now is how we can not build back better, but rebuild forward equal. I think that is like really, really crucial. And I think that there's not just one way to do that. We really need everyone's perspectives in that. And there are going to be, unique ways to move forward towards that better future and implementing that better future as soon as possible.
Erica, what were you anticipating we might talk about today?
I wasn't sure, Meta. Last time I came on, we were going to talk about nuclear proliferation, and we ended up speaking with 4 people about Afghanistan, which I loved it, and so on. So I'm happy to speak about whatever interests all of us.
All right, very good. Well, Leon, I know what's on your mind. You're irrepressible on this subject because you wanted to suggest that all countries should have a right to join NATO if they want to. And I said that I would love to see NATO implode. So let's see what you and Erica have to say to each other.
It's a few days before this year will be ending. So maybe we can share our ideas about this year. and about
Okay.
the lessons and ideas,
All right.
what we have in mind
Uh-huh.
about our experience, about humankind experience based on this year,
Uh-huh.
because it's
Okay, fine. Well, good. Now, Harry, we've just been joined by Marianne Larson, who's a professor of education at Western University, the same place where Erica teaches. As far as I know, you two women have never met. You both live and work in London, Ontario, and I'm now going to introduce you to each other. And my guess was that what we would talk about today is all of you are in the education business. You're either a consumer or a provider of education, as it were, and that you're doing international education. One of the things that Marianne has specialized in her research is the internationalization of higher education. And the last time I talked to Leon, teaching at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, he was telling me that he's giving courses in English, not English language. He's not teaching English language. He's giving his courses in English, in sociology or criminology or whatever there. And to me, that was very surprising because we do not have any students at the University of Toronto taking sociology courses delivered in Russian, as far as I know. And I was surprised at this, and I thought, I should introduce Marianne and Leon, and since Kekashan is a student and Erica is in the same racket as the rest of us, education. Let's see if there's any connection there on that topic. Marianne, what's on your mind? And now that I've too long a preamble.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Meta. Nice to see you all here today and to meet you, Erica. I've heard a lot about all of you, and particularly you, Erica, given that we're working at the same university. Actually, I just retired last year, so my formal title is Professor Emerita. I'm still connected by supervising graduate students and teaching courses, but I no longer have a permanent position at the university. I don't have any particular thoughts or things to talk about here. I'm mostly here just to listen and hear what others would like to speak about. Meta's right. Much of my research has been or was on the internationalization of higher education, but broadly speaking, I have had a long-standing interest in the role of all forms, informal and formal, of education in terms of creating global citizens. So global citizenship education and what that looks like in terms of peace building in the world today. So that's kind of the broader aspect of the work and my research agenda over the years. Some of that's been really specific, developing curriculum materials for using in public schools around global citizenship, researching programs in universities and schools that help young people and anybody working in educational institutions develop the kind of capacities that we think about when we associate with global citizens.
Marian, you were talking about global citizenship education, which is at Green Hope Foundation. Our whole core of our work is education for sustainable development that enables people around the world to become empathetic, responsible global citizens. And I just wanted to come in and say that I think that, especially now in the midst of a global crisis, is so crucial in all aspects, because we really need more of these empathetic global citizens, not just with our children and young people, but in our policymaking, in our private sector, in everywhere, really. And we really need this kind of rebooting of the education system that, instead of pushing people towards just seeing money as success, seeing helping people, helping the planet as that measure of success.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, and exciting to see the connections here and to hear about the work that your foundation is doing as well. One of the most interesting things I heard about later in 2021 is this initiative that I can't remember the name of, but I'll do a little Google search. It's young people who have felt that their teachers have let them down in terms of educating them around the climate crisis, and they've taken it upon themselves to educate their teachers. And this is sort of the movement that's taking place among young people in many different countries, where they're saying we're not going to tolerate not learning what we need to learn, and so we need to teach the teachers about the climate crisis. And I love that. I still do believe that much of what is going to happen is going to come from young people, and it's going to look very different from the way that it's looked over the past couple of decades in terms of organizing and social change.
But Marianne, this raises a question for me. To what extent does the instructor have control over what gets taught? If the curriculum is defined by some bureaucrat, in some building far, far away, I'm just not sure at the secondary and post-secondary level, I think that's not the problem so much. But at the secondary level, can the instructor simply say, now we're going to take the day and talk about climate, or not?
That really depends on the jurisdiction, and I can't speak for all jurisdictions around the world. Different governments write curriculum for their public schools some are more prescriptive than others. So in the case of Ontario, which I know quite well, there is a lot of room within at least the social studies, if not the broader curriculum, and I would say all curriculum areas, to do work around what I would call global citizenship. And that will look different in different kinds of classrooms. But I think when there's a will, there's a way. I met Meta a good 40 years ago as my introductory sociology professor at U of T when I was an undergraduate student. And for the most part, as far as I remember, Meta, you taught that as an introduction to peace studies course. So I know there's a lot more flexibility within higher education to shape the curriculum as you see fit in order to meet the course outlines. But I don't want to get into a discussion about whether it's possible in all kinds of jurisdictions. That is going to differ for public schools, state-run schools in different jurisdictions. Certainly more authoritarian states are going to have more of a strict hold on what gets taught and what isn't taught in schools. And you can see that even in the US today. So I'm not talking about authoritarian states outside of the so-called West. I think you see that in the West too. That's a separate conversation. I'd like to hear from Erica and Leon as well, so that I'm not sort of shaping the conversation myself.
Okay.
Well, it's very nice to meet you, Marianne. I also have followed your work on education and internationalization and global citizenship. My classes, I pretty well control what I teach. They're cross-campus courses. They're open to any students, and there's 400 students in them. I try to teach them to be global citizens, and what that means, which has evolved a great deal over the last 25 years. So we're always kind of catching up. I just changed the background of my picture because I went, we're talking about internationalization of education. I better get rid of the Christmas theme and go to neutral, which is my background now. I look like I'm in climate change instead, but anyway.
I want you to get a sweater, girl. You don't look comfortable.
I don't look like I've dressed for the winter, but because we have to be very aware of everything that we put on the screen, and we don't know that it could offend anyone anymore. And so I've learned a lot over the years that the kinds of pictures, for example, I teach at least 6 hours on terrorism in different classes at different levels. Mm-hmm. And over the years, I've learned a lot, Meta, about not putting constantly, I used to put pictures of white terrorists and so on, and then students would get offended. And then it was always extremely difficult. I made the mistake of putting a picture of the prophet on, which I thought was a beautiful picture of the prophet. And a student very politely corrected me for doing that too. So I have learned a lot, and I'm on a steep learning curve. I tried to take classes on EDID, equality, diversity, inclusiveness, and decolonization issues, and to understand the new vocabulary that we're all learning and so on. It's just that, like all of us, we're all racists, but we just don't know that we are. We are all implicitly, because of the culture that we've grown up in, racist. And so we have to try to conquer that. And it's very difficult, especially here in Canada, with the Indigenous issues that we all need to be more aware of as well. So on the topic of teaching and thinking, Marianne, I'm reading a very interesting book, which I'd love to talk to you about. It's called How Professors Think, or the Way That They Think. And it analyzes, it's a huge book. It analyzes how we think about what is excellence and so on. And it's also conditioned. So what we think, empirical and scientific and so on, is also very subjective. So it's all very interesting. I thought we were going to talk about NATO, but I'm happy to talk about higher education. Go ahead, Leon, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Erica, and it's a great pleasure to talk to you and to all of you. Uh, I think it's a very interesting topic about globalization of the education, including higher education. It's very different in various parts of the world. I totally agree that in authoritarian states, it's much more regulated. And for example, in Russia, you have a more room to change something in higher education, but it's very highly regulated in regular schools, and it of course it depends on the wider and greater political agenda. For example, the issue of the global citizenship or the global problems, it's very politicized. And in Russia, it's more or less not well accepted, honestly, especially in the level of the school education.
Sorry, let me see if I understand you. What do you think is opposed? What is, you say it is not well appreciated or something? What is the problem? Where are you finding things?
The problem is that official agenda about climate change, about ecology, it's a very controversial in Russia, I mean, of course, because on the one hand, authorities agree that it's a big issue. We should protect our environment and so on and so forth. But Russia, being one of the biggest producers of oil and gas, they have a kind of dependency on these technologies, and actually they promote the idea that we should do not rush to go to the green economy, to develop these new technologies, because they are very costly. They are also have their own dark side, these new technologies. So in reality, they agree that we should protect the environment, but in fact, in their curriculum of the school, you almost cannot find something about climate change, about protection of environment, and so on and so forth. It's better in the level of higher education, of course.
Yeah.
However, it's not so popular topics as well. So it looks like, from many, it looks like a kind of agenda of the so-called gold billion developed Western countries who promoted the idea that's very beneficial for them, but not so beneficial for the developing world, including Russia, something like that.
Right.
I do not agree with this. I do not share this, but I show you what kind of picture.
Yeah, that's my impression too, actually.
I wanted to comment on a few things. So first of all, in terms of educators having the authority to bring for their own curriculum, Green Hope Foundation is partnered with several school boards across the world. In Canada, we are official partners of the Toronto District School Board. We work with several other school boards here. We work with U of T as well. We're outside. We are partnered with Dubai's Education Board, Suriname's Youth Parliament, and we work with several others. What we have seen is that it does vary. And of course, in Canada, I think we are fortunate to live in a country that does allow for that flexibility compared to other nations. But definitely all around the world, we do need an acceleration of ensuring that sustainability and education for sustainable development and empathy education isn't just something that comes from the outside. It should become a normal part of the curriculum, just like languages or math or science, because they are a part of that. It is cross-curricular. The second thing I'd like to say is that, our education systems all across the world is based in that Western hegemonic way of thinking. So yes, it does get racist at times because it is just based on that it's based on colonialism. It's based on ensuring that we look at Western principles as the norm and move away from traditional localized solutions, which is something that needs to change. Like all around the world, it's not just our way of thinking. We need to take into account our Indigenous cultures, our local knowledge. And the third thing is that, yes, we work in 26 countries across 6 continents. What we have seen is that depending on how a state functions in the political agenda, there are topics that are seen as more taboo. And one of the prime examples, just before the call started, I heard there was talk of militarism. And, we work extensively on nuclear disarmament. And when we work in the 9 nuclear states, we have seen that when we talk about it with young people, of the importance of moving away from, militarism, moving away from nuclear weapons, there is that backlash because the nations put forward nuclear weapons as the source of pride, and not sharing the tremendous nuclear injustice that goes on behind the scenes and really how dangerous those weapons are. So in that sense, I definitely say that, there is this kind of censoring that goes on. And if we are talking about, knowledge being for all and the free flow of knowledge, this definitely needs to change. And particularly when we're talking about our children and young people, it's really important to not just think that, oh, they're not going to understand anything. They are. That is why we have our disarmament education programs that slowly brings children into this whole nuclear disarmament movement so that they're not blindsided by it when they pass out of college. They know what the issue is. They know why having a peaceful planet is so important, and then they're able to make informed decisions because their education helped them out in that sense. So,
well, now may I ask whether or not, when you go from one country to another, talking with students, do you find that countries that are pro nuclear weapons, that own nuclear weapons and are militaristic in their orientation, are the students there more supportive of those ideas, those militaristic ideas, than you would find if you go to someplace like Denmark or some very New Zealand or someplace that is less militaristic in their orientation?
Well, yes, we have seen that in the countries that are have signed on to the NPT, that have more peaceful societies in that sense. Definitely, the students there are more for peace because they've lived in a peaceful society. They know why it's so important. But at the same time, I would say that there are very strong advocates for peace and disarmament in the militaristic or nuclear arms states, because as young people, just as human beings, they do want to see a shift away from weapons and more towards social justice. But at the same time, like I said, with the media, they're just propagating, the government, they're propagating that these weapons are for our safety, this is for security. It is very easy for them as young impressionable minds to think that, oh, this is what is good. So yeah, it is, we kind of see both sides, and they try to argue for militarism, they try to argue for their benefits, but at the same time, we have been able to see a shift in their way of thinking when they are kind of exposed to the horrors of weapons of mass destruction, what can happen, what has happened in the past. And again, that is why disarmament education, no matter where people are, is so important, because that knowledge gives them the power to act and really to know their own mind.
Okay, but now if you can characterize one society as different from another in the sort of where the center of gravity is in student opinion, would you say that the attitudes toward climate change and, let's say, COVID are correlated with the attitudes toward militarism? Because I see, conservatives here as all having the same backward ideas. You don't believe that vaccines help you. You don't believe that you want to get out of militarism, and you don't believe in climate change. If that's the way you think, they seem to go together, and I have no idea why they would go together. There's no logic to it. But do you find that that is true in the students' populations that you visit?
Again, it does differ. For some, yes, it's like if they are for, obviously they're pro-vaccine, they want to fight climate change, and they're for peaceful societies. They're also for disarmament. But at the same time, the problem is that the issue of nuclear weapons and disarmament is not as talked about as, let's say, climate change or COVID or addressing the health crisis. And therein lies the problem, because the young people don't know about it in the first place, because, like I said, it's often seen as a taboo topic for young people because people think they're not going to understand it. They either don't have any opinion on it, or if their parents told them about it, or if they're fortunate to study in a school that speaks about it, they're more for disarmament. And then, they're obviously for climate justice and vaccines as well. But yeah, what we at Green Hope Foundation do try to do is address the climate nuclear nexus, speak about how climate injustice is linked to nuclear injustice and the pandemic, and how it is all interconnected, and really bringing the disarmament dialogue in there. Because again, while vaccines and climate change, it is talked about, like disarmament, not so much, and definitely not as much with young people. And that has the risk, obviously, of them going astray and moving more towards destruction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Who can somebody else contribute to this? Erica, just butt in.
Well, I don't like butting in, but I'm just interested in pursuing this idea that if you are against vaccines, then you're necessarily going to be a Republican and less educated and so on. Because what's interesting is in Russia, many people are not vaccinated. And why is that? It's not because they're less educated. It's not because they have right-wing beliefs. It's because they're distrustful of the state, and they don't believe what the state is telling them. And that's a legacy from the communism and from the Cold War. So, Russians, we have to understand, are not getting vaccinated, not because they have right-wing sort of Republican beliefs and they're against climate change, or they're against doing anything about the climate. It's because they're distrustful of the state and what was shoved down their throats. Like the textbooks that they learned from during the Cold War were all perused by the state authority. They were all Marxist and communist and so on. I want to mention Meta. I don't think Meta's textbook, which was reproduced, 9 times?
I think there were 10 editions, yeah.
10 editions in the United States, was necessarily an introduction to peace studies, as Marianne was saying. It was an introduction to sociology, but she put a lot more elements from the peace and conflict studies literature back then. And now it seems like an introduction to peace studies, but back then, what Meta did, which was a great accomplishment, was to write a basic textbook for sociologists, for generations of them, that was used again and again.
But Erica, when you say you don't know that it's right or left, that I think it's true of Republicans in general, that they are the ones in the US who, the Trump people, for example, are the ones that also are mistrustful of the government. And that was, Trump's claim to glory, was that he was going to drain the swamp and get rid of these bad people running the government and so on. So the connection between mistrust of government and right-wing attitudes, I think, even holds true there in the US. I don't know about the rest of the world. And Leon, what do you think about it as far as Russia is concerned? Or US too, Canada, because you teach here too. Sorry.
Yeah, about Russia, around 45% of Russians do not believe in COVID at all. That they think that it's a kind of biological weapon invented somewhere in the US or something like that, right? It's a lot of conspiracy theories around that, as well as some rational attitude that about vaccine. Because the issue that Sputnik the Russians did, it's a good vaccine, but the issue that the Russian pharmaceutical industry does not so well with producing. And there are a lot of violations of the technology, and people know about that, and they think that we do not trust not only the government, but we do not trust the pharmaceutical industry, that they do some unreliable product. So they try to understand in what factory they produce really good product, I mean a good vaccine. In the other factories, they produce bad vaccine, and they try to find this good product to be vaccinated. But so it's more complex than only trust to the government or do not trust to the government. It's a kind of active behavior, because some of Russians go abroad and have their own and have the vaccination in Ukraine or in Serbia or in other East European countries.
They go there just to get vaccinated. No.
Yes, they have a special vaccine tours from the from kind of tourist from some operators. They offer them some tours to Eastern Europe or former Soviet Union countries, including Georgia, maybe Georgia, but exactly in Ukraine. Therefore, it's a very interesting types of thinking and behavior around this vaccine and pandemic issues. One more striking issue that actually the number of anti-vaxxers in Moscow and St. Petersburg is higher than in the other parts of Russia.
In unvaxxers, really?
Yes. And it's for me, it's a kind of puzzle because in Moscow and St. Petersburg, it's more educated and more globalized and more advanced population. And the number of anti-vaxxers there higher than in the other parts of the country.
Well, now I've heard that this is true in a way of the climate issue too. That if you go to Siberia, there are plenty of people who know damn well what's going on around them. They look out the window and see their house falling down or something. They are really concerned about the climate, but you don't get it elsewhere. Is that true? Marianne, you have your hand up. Where are you?
Oh, I'm here.
Don't bother with your hands.
Okay, but maybe Leon, did you have anything further to say?
No, it's okay.
Before I kind of launch into what might be considered my main point, I just wanted to circle back to something that you said, Erica. I still have Meta's Introductory Sociology bookshelf on my book on my bookshelf downstairs, and yes, she did use it, and it is a remarkable introductory textbook. So very much so, when she taught that course, it was taught as an introductory course to the main concepts and theories and ideas and research associated with sociology. But in her lectures, she very much focused on the arms race. And it was really what inspired me to get involved and to be involved in Peace Magazine. And that course I took in 1983. So
yeah, well, I met Meta in 1983 too. And then
Yeah.
I've
So
known her, but I was so shy and so nervous, and I called her. I still remember the interview. I was doing a
yeah.
little piece for the UBC, and I asked her about the submarines, and she said, no money for submarines if there's no money for daycare. And those same issues are still around for women, you know? Like
Absolutely.
when women go into Russia and they become doctors, the salary goes down significantly. So they've done studies on this. As soon as women become educated in medicine, then the entire nation's salaries go down. So I mean, these issues have been around for 40 years, and I'm very interested to hear what you're all saying. So I think we all have lots of thoughts. But go
Yeah.
ahead, Marianne. You had a lot of points and then a main point. So let me move.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I'm not quite sure where to begin, but I just want to put something out there. As I've been doing research and teaching and working in the field of education over the last couple of decades, I've become, I believe that there's less um, value in seeing the world through a left-right spectrum. While there may be and are quite stark differences between the far right and the far left and everything in between, I'm not sure that in trying to understand differences in people and in political systems and in our world at large through a binary, any kind of binary, whether that's black, white, left, right, is very helpful. And I think if we're trying to map out um, attitudes towards the vaccine, toward the climate crisis, toward disarmament, onto that spectrum, I think it's a faulty tool, a faulty analytical tool to use. And I see Erica nodding her head. And I'll just add one extra piece to this discussion. I was going to run for the Green Party last year. I was a candidate in my riding here in London, and I decided to back out from that race for a whole bunch of reasons I won't get into now. But the Green Party is very interesting because within the Greens, you find people across the political spectrum who are deeply committed to environmental issues and the climate crisis and addressing the climate crisis. But you find anti-vaxxers, you find pro-vaxxers, you find people on the left and people on the right. So as I said, I think we need to really do our academic scholarly work in breaking down people's opinions about things. Why people are not getting vaccinated in Russia is going to look quite different for why people are not getting vaccinated in you can name any other place or sector of society, and that's an analysis and approaches then to addressing those things need to be different based on those readings, how we understand that. Kekashan, I love hearing you speak. I love what the work you've done with your foundation. You're so inspirational, and it's just such a joy to to see the work you've done, to see what an advocate you've been around issues and both concerning the climate and nuclear disarmament. And you know, one of the things that I thought about hearing you speak is, I think the really important shift in the environmental movement is a shift away from talking about global warming to talking about the climate crisis, and to indicate in people's minds and use a language that it is a crisis. And you know, there's all kind of metaphors that have been used: the house is on fire, and so on and so forth. But Seth Klein, I mean, he wrote a great book last year that came out called The Good War, and you know, equating the so-called battle that needs to be fought now, all hands on deck, around the climate crisis, to being similar to the so-called battle, and maybe the militaristic language isn't right here, to address the war, World War II. I don't think the peace movement did a good enough job around that with nuclear disarmament. You know, I don't remember ever hearing about the 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 war crisis or the peace crisis and really making people feel like it's a burning issue. They did back in the 80s when I was in the peace movement, but they lost that. And I think there's a reason why many people around the world don't think about the arms race in the same way that they did, even though it's such a pressing issue still today. But I think that language needs to change, and I don't know how that would happen. I think the work that your foundation is doing is probably a great start in making those links, because certainly we need to make the links around the injustice to do with militarization and the injustices associated with the climate crisis. and they're all connected, and it's racialized communities that bear the brunt of that the world over. Anyway, I've said enough. Thanks for listening. I've just turn it over to whoever wants to continue the conversation.
I wanted to actually jump in. First of all, thank you for your kind words. I actually wanted to jump in on the case of localization. First of all, with any crisis, with any issue, yes, they have global impacts, but like they also have very unique localized impacts, and there are unique localized reasons why people might not take to a certain solution. And again, working literally all across the world in very, very different societies, we do see that, of course, with climate. I always say climate justice, and particularly feminist climate justice, because we see firsthand on the ground how how the problems there are so different from what someone might be facing in Europe or in the US. And to the point of localization about the vaccine thing, I thought that it's really important to understand, sometimes why people don't take the vaccines. For example, in India, because if you might have seen in the news that there is increased religious persecution going on there right now. And a lot of the people, particularly from the rural areas who have never had access to education, are being told that, it either has cow ingredients in them or pig ingredients in them. So for different religions. And because of that, they think that they should not be taking the vaccine. And this kind of amplifies the religious conflict that goes on and actually creates a conflict that shouldn't exist in the first place. So that is just one example of a localized example of why people aren't taking the vaccines. But really, it's important that in order to address these global issues, we do move more towards a localized lens so that we are able to understand the unique challenges there on the ground, instead of just coming in from the outside with a typical Western lens and then saying, this is what you should do. It really should be more from the ground up and understanding why someone might not be adopting something. And just very quickly, someone I think talked about coal. Even with the climate crisis, people at COP26 were very understandably very upset that the language of the document said phase down coal instead of phase out, as was initially agreed upon. But at the same time, again, countries like India, countries in the Middle East, a lot of parts of the world depend literally on fossil fuels for their livelihood. So just saying that stopping that industry, it's not going to work. What we do need is a just transition. And therein lies the issue that instead of coming in with that one-size-fits-all solution, we see how we can address those unique challenges and move more towards equity, not just equality.
Thank you.
Can I mention, I've had 30,000 students. I remember their names. And you mentioned Seth Klein. I was his TA a long time ago at the University of Toronto. So I was quite proud to see his new book, which I admit I have not read, but I have studied closely his mother's NFB film, If You Love This Planet, which I think I've shown at least 1,000 times. I had a job, I show it to every class because it's one of the films that shows the effects of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And all around the world, people are doubting that Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, just as they're doubting in Africa and other parts of the world that the Holocaust ever occurred.
Really?
You can look it up. Yeah, you can. I don't have the facts, but people actually who are not educated, when told about the Holocaust, do not believe that it ever happened. They cannot believe it. The same is true of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we need to educate people, what I call the disbelievers, about climate change, which they see, as you point out, Meta, every day in Siberia. They see in their backyards the snow is melting and is not there. We no longer see a nuclear war, but there could be a nuclear war. And this is what I wrote an article in the Hill Times yesterday, all over the weekend, on the differences between the similarities between the Cuban Missile Crisis and the current Ukraine crisis. But it's more dangerous now because we live in a multipolar world, and we live in a world where the communication is lightning speed with Twitter and insults and so on that go back and forth that undermine deterrence. So when you were saying, Marianne, why do the climate change people not think about it? It's because we haven't had a nuclear war for 75 years, but it is possible, as David Suzuki and other people in the Green Party have pointed out. Actually, Suzuki's not in the Green Party. He's obviously a supporter of the NDP. But that said, he has pointed out, as have others, that once there's a small nuclear exchange, even the size of 100 tactical nuclear weapons between India and Pakistan, we'll see a nuclear winter. And we'll see all around the world famine. And then people will be talking not just about the TPNW, but the fact that the NPT is outdated. I just want to mention that we were talking about the NPT. Pretty well every country in the world has signed the NPT. That doesn't mean that their populations and their students are in any way more pro-disarmament at all. Here in Canada, we haven't signed the TPNW, but we've signed the NPT, and that hasn't seemed to have any impact on our students.
By the way, I just forgot the word this morning that they're not going to hold the in-person meetings.
Yeah, there's no still. It's only I'm attending virtually the NPT review conference as part of the Parliamentarians for Non-Nuclear for PNND. I'm attending as part of that delegation. It will all be virtual, Meta, which means that it might be good, it might be terrible. I'm a big supporter of Zoom like you. I want to just mention it to everyone. I have to run. I'm making a huge turkey dinner for my son's girlfriend's parents. These are the only people in our social bubble. I'm dressed to the nines, as you can see, and I absolutely have to get out there. I can smell it, but it's going, Meta. So I'm so excited about them visiting that I'm going to have to say goodbye, but I really love seeing all of you. So thank you so much.
Go get warm. You look so cold. Okay, bless you, dear. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, so where are we on this? She didn't ever answer Leon where I wanted her to tell you about NATO, because you and she have the makings of an argument, but maybe you can say your point of view and somebody else will pitch in and take her side.
You mean that I can share my point of view? Okay, my idea that NATO is a bureaucratic structure. It's not so efficient, and we should not exaggerate its impact. But the idea behind NATO is it's a kind of additional bureaucratic structure, additional to the current war machines in 30 countries. And main effect of NATO, it's a restrictions of unplanned and chaotic actions of the members of NATO. Therefore, if we disintegrate NATO, it means that actually it impacts nothing on the war machines, because they are still in place with NATO or without NATO. No additional or no less military troops because of NATO. But it's a kind of mechanism of coordination that restrict unplanned and unconventional actions of the member states of NATO. Therefore, my idea that without NATO, many actions that are not praised by the international community, including, for example, bombing of Serbia, it will be much easier and quicker than without NATO, because it's a kind of mechanism of
I'm sorry, what will be
conferences.
Wait a minute. What will be easier and quicker than without NATO?
For example, bombing of Serbia, of Belgrade, for example, in 1990s, because before that it was maybe 4 years of negotiations, of international conferences, of talks, and so on and so forth. Without, for example, the US could do it much quicker and easier without NATO. So from my point of view, it's a mechanism of restrictions, but not mechanism of of increasing of military actions and presence in
Well, if you see that it could restrict members, that sounds good. Let's include Russia and China in NATO then.
yeah, I think so. Yeah. By the way, it was an idea of
I
Putin
know. I know it
from the
was.
very beginning, and I made special study about that in the beginning of 2000s. And by the way, you can find it on the NATO website so far, where I found that maybe 1/3 of Russian elite would be not opposite
Yeah.
NATO. And I think it would be very good if Russia and China would be included.
But the whole thing is still part of a whole mentality of solving problems by using weapons. And the amount of resources devoted to the development of arms, arsenals, and so on is simply unconscionable. And it does not increase our security. And the real security threats that we face are from things like germs now. You're not going to kill COVID by building ICBMs or nuclear torpedoes, and this is not helpful, and it's a distraction, and it takes resources away from things we really need to handle. Climate change, and we need to start handling cyber crime, cyber risks and threats of that kind. We have 1,000 different things that need attention, and the expenditure of these massive amounts of money for producing things that can only harm people, can only be designed to injure the human beings, is unconscionable. I'm sorry, but it's just not acceptable to me.
Yeah, of course, I totally agree with that. But I think the problem of NATO, in this sense, it's not so important and not so closely related. I think it's, one more time, it's a bureaucratic structure, not so important finally in terms of military machines and development of armament and this kind of things, right? Therefore, a problem of armament, of course, we should try to, in this, try to pursue the idea of disarmament. But I think in this sense, the problem of NATO is not so important.
Mm-hmm. Marianne, I'd like your thoughts about the development of internationalization of education, higher education in particular, because that's your area, and I've always wanted to have a special talk show with you about it. But now that you and Leon are, you both have been dealing with the trend toward, well, I shouldn't call it a trend because that's presupposing something. Maybe it's not a trend. Maybe we're going the other direction. Maybe there's more a reversion to a nationalistic thinking in higher education. I don't know. But what is your impression about that? And what are your hopes for the further development of that?
Gosh, those are big questions, Meta. Thanks for giving me a bit of a platform here. I and others just have a few minutes, so I'll just very briefly say, like many of the things we've talked about today, it depends. So around the world, universities and public school systems are internationalizing or taking on a more international components, and that means a lot of different things. It might mean outside of English-speaking countries offering programs in the English language, like Leon has talked about, the use of what's called English as a medium of instruction. That has become quite popular as English is now broadly seen as a global lingua franca around the world. And that is to attract international students who would like to have a degree in English. And the reason that universities are attracting international students is because in many cases, public funding of higher education is being cut and they're looking for other income sources. And international students generally pay a higher fee than domestic students do to go to university. And so those are some examples of what internationalization looks like. But we can also talk about internationalizing the curriculum to create global citizens and the kinds of things that Kakashin was talking about earlier around developing empathetic young people who care about the world around them, who feel they have a responsibility to the planet and to other people in the world, and so on and so forth. And to me, those are all very positive aspects of internationalization. But broadly speaking, I would say that there are different rationales for universities and schools to internationalize. And in the literature, those are broken down into neoliberal rationales, which are largely economically driven by economics and the desire to profit. And I think those are problematic. But we can also speak about broader social, cultural, or educational rationales for internationalizing. In other words, using education as a force for social good, the public responsibility of higher education and educational institutions to create students who care about the earth around them. I think those are all very positive aspects. And you will sometimes find an educational institution doing more of the internationalizing to make money and less of the other forms of internationalizing. But I think in many cases you'll find both. And you often will find that within an institution. So that's all I'm going to say right now. It's one over after 1:30 on my clock. So I'll just stop, but we can continue the conversation another time too.
Thank you. Okay, Kekashan, I'm going to let you have the last word because you're the consumer of all of this. You know, as a student, I really wonder what it is like to be in the midst of all these things at the same time that you're out there organizing other students to take charge. That's the beauty of what you're doing. I appreciate it very much. But what does it feel like to be on the recipient end of whatever people theorize about the right way to teach students?
Well, as a student, first of all, as a student in a free country, it is much better for me than many of the other people and the young people that we work with in other parts of the world. And of course, I do feel, as someone who does work within the education system and outside it as well, that there is a lot more that can be done. But what I would, again, strongly advocate for is the dismantling of the Western hegemonic way of learning and teaching, and instead just see learning as something that is lifelong, and that is something that our Indigenous cultures promote. That is something that our other non-Western cultures promote. So as a student, I would really like to see that. And once again, you know, not just putting forth success as, you know, how much money you earn, but actually seeing success as how much you're able to help someone or how much you're able to help the planet, and really allowing students to define their own path of success. I think the pandemic has shown us that, you know, being your own boss is something that is feasible for young people, and something that we are also trying to see how we can empower young people to do that. But yeah, as a student, I think that is where we need to go. And hopefully with Green Hope Foundation, we're able to bring about that change so that everyone have the skill sets, the mindsets, the tools, and the behaviors to think and act for a sustainable future. And by that, I don't just mean the environment. That is a terrible misconception people have, that sustainability is just environmentalism. It is, but it's much more than that. It's also about social justice, gender justice, racial justice, and a stable economy. So yeah, towards that sustainable future.
Thank you. This is very uplifting and a good way to launch a new year. So I appreciate your being here. I hope you all celebrate, and I hope Erica's turkey tastes good and we all have fun tonight, and Happy New Year. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Happy holidays. Take care. Bye.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, sometimes even more. And this is episode 391. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts or read the transcripts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. And when you get to the website, do look around, because we have conversations going on all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, Scroll down and share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in.